Welcome and bienvenidos to Cultural Capacity, a podcast sponsored by Educator Aid Incorporated, where our team is committed to supporting individuals and organizations on their journey of self-aware leadership, emotional wellness, and development of effective cross-cultural communications. Let's get ready to explore the following topics together by biting into them with little pieces that go really deep to examine ourselves. Topics like bias, culture, cultural psychology, cultural neuroscience, diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial equity. Our episodes are all 10 minutes or less and intended to serve as introspective tools for you as the individual leader or the teams that you're leading. Be sure to check out the links in the podcast description where you can sign up for our free quarterly subscription, Better Community, as well as tap in and submit your questions via the voice message button. Let's get ready to learn together. All right, welcome. This is part 2, connected back to the previous episode called How Do I Connect More Deeply to My Cultural Origin Story? My name is Justine Gonzalez, and I will be your hostess for this episode. Again, it's a 2-parter. I am recording both of these while I am in Puerto Rico visiting, so please do pardon if you hear roosters, coqui frogs, or birds in the background. You might also just hear the wind because I'm sitting on my balcony here recording this. But wanted to share a little bit more deeply. In the previous episode, I talk in general about one of the texts that I was studying while I was here and just how this experience has been emotional at times and also grounding because it's such a part of who I am in being a Boricua. But I want to talk about some ways if you're not big on traveling, let's say you have a fear of flying, or maybe even since the pandemic, it's really just shifted how your perspective on travel. I've talked to many people that's happened for. I do want to give you some tangible ways that I started really diving more into my cultural origin story. And part of this, some of you may not want to hear this and you may turn me off at this point, whatever you need to do. But I do think really deeply connecting with our own cultural origin stories and knowing who we are is one of the most incredible steps of action that we can take towards self-awareness. And people often say, well, I want to develop more cultural empathy towards this group of people, or I want to create more self-awareness around this topic or this subject. Well, often our perspective has to do with where we're standing. Well, that's always true. Our perspective depends on where we're looking and where we're standing and how we have experienced the world. So there's really only one thing we can become expert in, and that is our own lived experience. And for me, it was often linked back to coming from these two really wild worlds at time. My lineage is traced back to my grandmother, who was an orphan, may she rest in peace, who married my grandfather, who came to the States from Puerto Rico at the age of 16, not speaking any English. He came to Chicago. That is then where they met. My father was born in Chicago. He married my mother. They were both 19. My mother actually grew up, my grandparents on that side both spoke Dutch and grew up in the Amish tradition and then converted to Mennonite and then had some other transitions. So there's a lot intertwined in cultural origin stories beyond just ethnic tribes and race classifications. So when you think of your complete cultural origin story, for many folks, and I'm going to speak specifically to the listeners in the United States, for many, many folks in the United States, I think there is this latching onto this idea of being American because it is what exists and it's what's known. Now, a true indigenous American or Mesoamerican person, right, it might be the fact that I have Taino lineage, which is an indigenous tribe to specifically Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic areas. But technically, even though those are Caribbean culture, those are part of North America, South America, right? And so you had millions and millions of indigenous native American peoples. So when you have an influx of immigrants and essentially refugees who were fleeing in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s from Germany, from England, from Wales, from Ireland, from Italy, from all these places, you see an influx of people who they might have some ties to their origin stories, but when you get further down through generations like my own, unless you have put in that work to really know, you might know, oh, well, my grandpa on my mom's side was Irish or whatever. But many adults that I speak to who are in the age range of their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, even their 50s and 60s, beyond knowing, oh, my grandfather was raised in Tennessee or Georgia or etc., often, in particular for white Americans, I there is a disconnect. I can say that even for myself, with my mom's side of the family, I think we had a blessing in that the Amish do a great job of actually charting and detailing and writing out the lineage and the family trees. And so there was a lot that dated back. I had many, many conversations. My grandfather passed on that side of the family, who his surname was Troyer. He passed in September of 2021. And then my mother passed just a few months ago. May both of them rest in peace, but she passed in January of 2022. So the thing I'm going to tell you that you might not like, and that it even makes me a bit emotional to talk about, is that your cultural origin story has so much to do with your own healing journey, and also understanding perhaps some of those generational things. I call them things because they can be wounds, they can be scars, they can be curses, they can be lots of strongholds. And often, specifically, I will speak to some of my upbringing, which was in the evangelical and Baptist traditions. Often those are coined as generational curses. Um, I think of it as, we get our time on earth, and we all have things that happen to us that are just unjust and unfair. I do believe that for every person, that you have had encounters or experiences where you have been treated unjustly or unfairly. And it could have been based on any number of things, by how we like to try to categorize and identify other humans. But at the end of it all, it is still our responsibility to seek out our own healing. I think for me, my own cultural origin story, a lot of it began with, honestly, doing things like Ancestry DNA, reading texts that were related to not only the migration of the Swiss and German peoples, which is part of my lineage, but specifically knowing that my grandfather found himself to have the blood of Eskenazi Jew, and having that tradition traced to the Middle Eastern portions of my lineage. So there's a lot. I could say a lot about this. I'm actually moving around right now because my laptop's about to die. But especially in Germany to Puerto Rico during this first trip, um, I have learned that many of us, we are often seeking these big experiences, myself included. And believe me, I love, love, love to travel. And sometimes it is about the being and the knowing and the connecting within ourselves that can actually enhance and help us gain the clarity we want around our cultural origin stories the most. And I say that because, in my wildest dreams, I might think, oh, well, this would be so cool to experience this. And I need to go to this type of traditional ceremony and this and that. And the reality is, I needed to be with myself. I needed to be in complete acceptance of any of the feelings or emotions that were coming up for me during this journey. And so, outside of a few tangibles, like, starting to research your own family tree, looking at your DNA, and starting to unpack in those very more superficial ways that are helpful and are connecting for us, but more so, how are you connecting each day with yourself? And so again, that's why in this part one of this, I actually read a text that I've been pondering for the past few days, and just really challenging myself Are you allowing yourself to just be and to soak in and understand what you're experiencing right now? So the one of the best actions we can actually take, again, you might not like me saying this, is not to actually go do a bunch of things. It's to sit within ourselves and to reflect on where we find ourselves in this current moment, and what we know about ourselves and what we choose not to know about ourselves. Sometimes that will give us some breadcrumbs as to where our healing or our journey of learning needs to take a turn next, based on that. What are we willing to maybe not unpack or discover about ourselves? So just wanted to hop on and share that amidst the beautiful palm trees that I'm looking at swaying in the breeze, and want to thank you all. We do have, I think, one ad per episode now for this. So again, please keep sharing, and please tap in. We would love to hear some of your own story with a question that you would love to answer. So hit subscribe, write us a review, and let's keep getting compassionately curious about ourselves and others. Take care. Thank you so much for showing up for yourself today and tuning in to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. We're glad you're here. If you found value in this episode, be sure to share out with your social networks. Hit the subscribe button and leave us a review on Apple. You know, all the things. Finally, don't forget to take advantage of our free quarterly subscription that is in our podcast description. The link is right there. It's called Better Community, and we would love to have you join us there too. Until next time, take care.